Welcome to the She Said Privacy, He Said Security podcast. Like any good marriage, we will debate, evaluate, and sometimes quarrel about how privacy and security impact business in the 21st century.
Hi, Jody Daniels here. I'm the founder and CEO of Red Clover Advisors, a certified women's privacy consultancy. I'm a privacy consultant and certified informational privacy professional and provide practical privacy advice to overwhelmed companies.
Hi, Justin Daniels here. I am passionate about helping companies solve complex cyber and privacy challenges during the life cycle of their business. I am the cyber quarterback helping clients design and implement cyber plans as well as help them manage and recover from data breaches.
And this episode is brought to you by, that was like Wimpyville.
Well, I invited that.
We help Red. See, you've got me all mixed up here. So this episode is brought to you by Red Clover Advisors. We help companies to comply with data privacy laws and establish customer trust so that they can grow and nurture integrity. We work with companies in a variety of fields, including technology, e-commerce, media, and professional services. In short, we use data privacy to transform the way companies do business. Together, we're creating a future where there's greater trust between companies and consumers. To learn more, visit redcloveradvisors.com. Today is a very fun episode. And Justin, I know you're so excited to get started. So let's dive on in. We have a very special guest, Rachael Tenerowicz, who is the Director of Privacy and Cybersecurity Legal at Uber Technologies. Prior to joining Uber in May of 2017, Rachael spent more than 8 years working in litigation. And at Uber, she is the Director for Privacy and Cybersecurity Legal and the primary counsel for the information security team, supporting incident response investigations, working on information security related issues like ESG, and so much more that we're going to learn about today. So Rachael, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Jody. I'm so happy to be here.
Well, Justin, would you like to get us started?
Certainly. So, Rachael, how did your career evolve to your present role that you have today?
Yeah, it's a good question. I love knowing this about other people, and mine's kind of interesting. I started out in law school in litigation at Thirdparty and Bacon. And it was what I was passionate about right in law school and coming out of law school. And I loved it. I really learned from a great group of lawyers there and loved doing litigation for many years. But kind of later in my career, I started getting into litigation that was related to protecting assets from cyber criminals and how you could do that through the civil process instead of through criminal enforcement. And through this kind of little body of work that I got involved in, I started learning about security and I quickly fell in love with it and thought it was such a fascinating topic. And I didn't even realize this was something lawyers could get involved with. So I started looking for more ways to get involved into cybersecurity. And then this opportunity at Uber presented itself. And I had some colleagues working at Uber that were raving about the company and the really interesting legal issues that they were handling. And so I came on board and I've never looked back. I don't miss litigation now that I'm cybersecurity 100%.
Well, let's dive on into what some of those items are that you're covering about cybersecurity. And, maybe we should start with what ESG is and the cybersecurity relationship that it has with those types of disclosures.
Yeah. So ESG it stands for environmental, social, and governance. So these are really sort of non-financial factors that investors are more and more looking towards when they're thinking about which companies they should invest in. These factors more go towards like corporate value around ethics and sustainability, things like energy consumption, diversity, things like that. And so some of the metrics that are included in ESG are privacy and cybersecurity. So they are those sort of non-financial components of what, your corporate values are, what your corporate citizenry is. And, it really does help provide or kind of give investors a picture of maybe what your value might be like over the long term.
Yes,
Right.
you're looking at me funny.
Because that's fun. So, kind of turning to a little more specifics around investment in cybersecurity. What do investors need to know about cybersecurity, and what questions should they be asking?
Yeah, I think investors are not really sure what they need to know about cybersecurity. And I say this because I've seen the questions investors ask, and they always ask, have you had a breach? Um, Fair question, especially for someone who may not be familiar with cybersecurity, but I don't think it's your first question. And it's not the best question because breach is not a defined term. So often companies don't know how to respond to that. It's, it has a legal meaning. And so are you saying in the legal sense, or are you saying more in the vernacular sense of how security folks talk about breaches? And then even if you're thinking in the legal sense, breach has a different meaning. There's a different threshold under every country's jurisdiction. So if you're a global organization, you're like, well, something may have been a breach in one country, but not another. So what do you mean? So I don't think it's the best question to ask. I also don't think it necessarily speaks to what a company's privacy or cybersecurity practices are. Because any company, no matter how mature your cybersecurity or privacy programs are, can experience a breach. There's always going to be zero-day exploits that even the most mature company could fall prey to. So that's why I don't think it's the best question. I think instead, investors should be looking at, thinking about how they can understand what is the maturity of this company's cybersecurity program. Is it a loosely formed organization that has no written policies or practices and it's one person? Or, is it a more robust organization that is well resourced, looking at, the size of the company, the type of data they collect and their threat landscape? Do they have written policies and procedures? Are issues escalated up into leadership and the board? Are they investing in security and privacy? And, what kind of, risk approach does the company have? And so these are kind of like the higher level areas that investors should be asking questions about. And breaches can be one of those components, but it's not necessarily the most important because I don't think it's the most telling.
So what about a metric standpoint? So if I share these things, is it, and how do we kind of tie that to what the goals might be? So much of what we see in an ESG, using energy as an example, this is what we use today. Our goal is to be reducing carbon footprint by X% in 3 years. What are you starting to see as it relates to the security industry with these metrics being disclosed in this ESG universe?
Yeah.
As a lot of pieces all put together.
Yes. So this is the challenge that companies and, accounting standards are faced with, is that there really aren't good security metrics to report. I mean, most companies are just publishing more narratives about their cybersecurity program, which can be highly subjective. They can be very high level. That doesn't provide a lot of real value. And the one metric is the number of breaches, but as for the reasons I've discussed, that's a poor metric because it doesn't, even if you have a high level description of the breach, it just is never going to be enough information for an investor to gauge, like, well, was this preventable? Was this due to a lack of maturity, or was this something no one could have prevented? It tells you nothing about how the company responded or remediated the incident. And so it's not a good metric. And I've voiced this, and I think generally it's understood in the cybersecurity community, especially those involved in ESG reporting and risk and legal. We all know this is a terrible metric, but no one's really thought of anything better. I do think there are some things that you can report on, such as, Are you certified by any, industry recognized accreditation? So are you ISO certified? Are you SOC 2 compliant? Do you have a PCI? And I think that these are metrics that are probably better, but still it's just one piece of information, and you can't really understand what growth might be like from year to year. If you're just ISO certified from year to year, like, investors really can't glean from that whether you're growing or maturing in any way.
So let's talk a little bit about these recent SEC cyber disclosure rules. Would you like to share with our audience kind of in general what that is, and maybe a little bit about how that might impact not only public, but privately held companies who want to do business with the publicly held company?
Yes. So these new SEC rules are actually disclosure requirements that a publicly held company must disclose material cybersecurity incidents within 4 business days of sort of when you determine that it is a material cybersecurity incident. And this short reporting window is unprecedented to make a public disclosure about a cybersecurity incident. It's even thinking about, like, if you have to report an incident to a regulator, that information necessarily doesn't become public upon reporting it to a regulator. So this is really going to, if these rules are not amended, they're just proposed at this point, really impact how companies have to think about incident response and prioritizing the things that they're doing when a major incident occurs. And I think it's going to impact companies in a negative way.
What do you think companies need to do to prepare for these? So let's say these proposed rules are finalized. What do you think that's going to look like for companies to be able to meet these requirements?
So I think the 2 big issues I see with the rules as currently drafted is that, one, will be required to potentially disclose about a cybersecurity incident that is still ongoing and unmitigated. So that presents significant risks to you as a company, that if you have some vulnerability that you haven't mitigated, it could open yourself up to further attacks from threat actors. 2, it could compromise ongoing investigation into an ongoing threat actor who is in your environment, or that, maybe you've booted them out of your environment, but you're still trying to figure out who they are and work with law enforcement. It could compromise those investigations. The other big issue with this 4-day disclosure requirement is that this would more likely than not require you to tell the general public about the incident before you've had an opportunity to tell the impacted individuals and customers. And so this just not only is just thinking about, you've got your priorities flipped, like you should be telling the impacted customers before you disclose to the general public about the incident, so that they can protect themselves. They can take any measures that they need to take to protect their data or other online accounts to the extent they could be impacted. But it creates a logistical nightmare for a company. So just anyone who's familiar with incident response, and Justin, I know you know this very well, is that if you have to disclose an incident before you've told the impacted customers, you're going to get flooded with customer support calls. You're going to get flooded with press, reaching out to you, asking for details, from business partners who want to know about the incident, whether their data or their customers' data is impacted. And so you're going to be dealing with this customer support nightmare while you're still trying to remediate and investigate an incident and notify the people who are actually affected. And so I think companies need to think about how they're going to proactively deal with the inbounds they're going to get from this public disclosure, and try and minimize in how you disclose it, meet the requirements, but not disclose too much information that you could put yourself at risk for further attacks or compromise your investigation.
I know you have some thoughts brewing in there that you want to talk about. It's one of your favorite topics.
I think to add to Rachel's point, is now if you're a privately held company and you want to do business with these publicly traded companies, these disclosures are going to require them to start looking into their third-party vendor ecosystem a lot more invasively. And so now if I'm a startup or a mid-sized company where I was kind of flailing at cybersecurity, now if I want to do business with a publicly traded company, they're going to be looking at me very closely because these regulations were very specific. And one of our primary concerns is the third-party vendor ecosystem, because so many of these hacks originate not with the company itself, but with one of the vendors in their ecosystem. So to me, this law has broad implications for privately held companies as well as publicly held.
You hit the nail on the head, and that I think would be the scariest thing for these third-party vendors is your breach then gets out of control. You no longer have control over your narrative because you have to inform the data holder, so your publicly held companies who might be using your services, and then they may have an obligation to disclose it in an 8K filing, and then it's public. And these 8K filings are formatted in a way that makes them easily searchable. And so I know that now all that's going to be happening is someone's going to be designated at all the major, news hubs of searching these 8K filings to see who's had a recent breach and let's write about it. So it's not well thought out on the SEC side. And I hope all the public comments that have been coming in will help educate the SEC, and that we'll see a different draft or new revisions that will help address some of these concerns.
Because Rachel, I have to be honest, if the FBI or Secret Service tells me for law enforcement purposes, we don't want you to disclose this because we're tracking a big crypto gang, I'm going to be hard pressed to say I'm not going to listen to people who have the power to arrest people, because the SEC has a rule out there that says even if law enforcement says don't do it, we're still going to require the disclosure. Yeah, I don't know how I'm going to comply with that.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think a lot of companies might side with the law enforcement agency. Seems like the greater public interest would be served into getting this crypto gang, put them behind bars, or at least get them off so that they're not hurting other companies, as opposed to just disclosing the public about this incident.
So hopefully that one will get changed. I guess we'll just have to see what happens.
I'll have to wait and see.
It feels like we got here because companies did the polar opposite. They spent a very long time before they disclosed anything. And if you think about that, and even this idea of ESG and metrics, it's all around trust. And so how should companies be thinking about trust when it comes to these disclosures, when they think about trust with ESG? How do they connect those pieces?
Yeah. I mean, trust really should be your guidepost. It should really be the why behind the things you do for privacy and security. The law sets kind of the floor. The law is like, this is a minimum of what you need to tell people about, but really you should be not basing on what is your bare minimum under the law, but really is how do you garner trust with the customers and the public? And you do that by being a good steward of their data, whether it's through privacy principles, that you're transparent about how you collect and use their data, or through security, knowing that you are going to safeguard their data and that you have good data security practices in place. And so really that should be your underlying why. Why are we doing this? Should we do this? What should we tell users? And so I think that that's sort of your backbone, is what your starting point should be.
I think that makes a lot of sense.
Indeed, it does.
Yes.
Just having a little bit of fun.
No fun.
No, that's fine. Rachel, we could talk for hours on a variety of different topics, but why don't we just ask you, as we ask all of our guests, do you have a best personal security tip that you like to share with us?
Yes, it is the one you hear the most, but I repeat it because I don't think people follow it. Please use good password hygiene. So do not reuse your passwords. It's very important, and use really strong passwords. Passphrases are better. And it's not brand new. It's something everyone's heard. But again, we keep seeing compromises happening because people still do not employ these practices in their everyday life.
What are your thoughts on password? Why am I forgetting?
Managers.
Yes, password managers.
Really good to use a password manager. I think it helps you to, whether it's through like your keychains or whatever, it's good to have a place where you can store them so you can remember them. Otherwise, you're going to be resetting them frequently, which I think companies are making it very easy with 2FA and things like that to reset your passwords. But yeah, password manager is probably your best bet.
Now, do you have any password managers that you would recommend?
I think LastPass is a really good password manager, especially something that's not tied to a specific device. So such as like, the keychain on your iPhone. So if you're looking something that's more across the board and is cross device, I would recommend that one.
That sounds good. Now, when you are not managing information security, ESG, reading about the latest SEC disclosures, what do you like to do for fun?
What do I like to do for fun? I just started teaching yoga probably about 6 months ago. So I am still trying to learn how to be a yoga teacher. And it's been really, really fun. It's very different doing yoga versus teaching yoga. And it makes you a better yoga practitioner. And yeah, I love it. And so that's what I do a lot on my spare time, is looking for better ways to teach yoga, and also just hanging out with my husband and my pets. We live in Calaveras County, which is in the Sierra foothills. And so we're pretty new to this area. So we're still exploring and learning about everything that this area has to offer.
Well, that sounds quite lovely. I know we have a big yogi over here to my right.
Oh, yeah. Without a doubt, yoga is a life-changing experience from how much better you feel because you're much more flexible and your joints are not so sore, because yoga is really good about all that stuff.
It is. I totally agree with you.
Now, if someone would like to learn more and connect with you, where should we send them?
Yeah, I am available on LinkedIn, Rachael Tenerowicz. And so you can find me there. I check my messages frequently, so feel free to reach out. I'm happy to connect with anyone interested in any of these topics.
And so many more that we couldn't cover today. So thank you so much, Rachael, for sharing with us. I think it's really interesting to see what will happen with these disclosures. I think many companies are kind of jumping on the ESG train, and what those right metrics are will continue to evolve. We really appreciate you sharing your perspective today.
Thank you, Jody. Thank you, Justin. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for listening to the She Said Privacy, He Said Security podcast. If you haven't already, be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes and check us out on LinkedIn. See you next time.